Hi, my dear friends. My name is Dr. Anna Brodski. I'm an anthroposophic physician and I'm also a GP. I work in Sussex. The reason I do these videos is because I want to share the knowledge, the information, and practical wisdom that I have developed over the years with all my viewers, so that you are empowered to change your health and lifestyle and life quality of life for the better. And today I want to talk about worms. Yeah, the intestinal worms that you think are totally irrelevant. But I believe this is not true. And if you think this doesn't concern you, I bet it does. And I'm going to tell you why. Over the last year, I have become aware that there is actually a lot of evidence that all of the sea products that we consume are very likely contaminated with worms, intestinal worms, and worm eggs. Worm eggs are very difficult to eradicate. So, for example, they can survive in soil for decades. It takes quite high temperatures to kill them. Most seafood is not cooked very much, right? So, leave alone sushi. So basically, if this fish, this seafood, has got some eggs or worms, they're never going to be killed by cooking, and certainly not when you go to a restaurant, because nobody wants to be served overcooked fish. I have come across some sources which I'm going to link in the description below, that about 70% both of freshwater fish and salty water fish are contaminated. And it doesn't start with fish, it starts with the crustaceans that the fish consume. And different worms have different life cycles, but the eggs are so microscopic we won't see the eggs in the fish meat when we eat it. And that's a problem, because once they are in our gastrointestinal tract, they grow big. Some of the worms can be meters long. And then obviously they take your energy, they suck your blood, they suck all the nutrients from your gastrointestinal tract. And there have been cases where people ended up with bowel obstruction because of sheer volume of the worms. The problem with worms is that they're parasites, and all parasites, they masquerade and they adapt in such a way that the host has no idea that they have something going on. And another problem with worms is that there are no symptoms that you can just attribute to infestation. They're all very general and non-specific. It could be weight loss, difficulty gaining weight, abdominal discomfort, maybe nausea. Most of the time people don't have any symptoms, but I feel personally that a lot of people with, for example, chronic fatigue syndrome, they probably have intestinal worms. So the other things that intestinal worms cause is fatigue and aches and pains, brain fog. I mean, this list will go on and on and on. But the purpose for this video really is just to make you aware that you have a very, very high chance of already having intestinal worms. Now, the question arises, what do we do about it, right? Good news is that you can get rid of them. But bad news is that in the NHS, and obviously I'm on the inside of the system, the way we have been trained is basically to the effect that in the UK, intestinal worm infection, and obviously I am combining all worms just into one bracket. I'm not talking about specific worms. The thread worms are more common, especially in children, and you can buy something over the counter for that. I am actually talking about long worms, round worms, flat worms, all the big ones, which in the NHS, most of GPs believe don't exist in the UK. But like I was saying, there is a growing amount of evidence to say this unfortunately is pretty common. So coming back to what we do about it, it's really hard to get your GP to diagnose intestinal worms because we don't have a test. We do have many pool tests, but it's not common to send stool sample for microscopy to look for parasite eggs, which is what we want. Actually, that's what we want. And if the single stool sample comes back with negative reading, it doesn't mean you don't have intestinal parasites. So ideally, we would send multiple samples, but in practice, it is not done. It doesn't work like that. And there is one more problem. So say your GP does diagnose you with worms, and they give you a course. It's usually a course of mebendazole twice a day for 3 days. The problem with that is, whilst it's a good medication, it kills adult worms, it does not touch the eggs. And then the instructions go like this: if reinfestation occurs, repeat the course in 6 weeks. So 6 weeks is the length of time for the eggs to develop into sexually mature worms. But the problem is, if we then repeat the course of treatment in 6 weeks, we again kill the adult worms, but their eggs are still there. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, but of course there are ways to get around that. Another question you have to ask is how to prevent this. And I will tell you what I have done, because I mean all of this comes out of experience, really, both personal and practice at work. I have quit eating all sea products about over a year ago now, and I think I had intestinal worms. I mean, the other thing it can cause you is black circles around the eyes. I've mentioned tiredness, I've mentioned aches and pains, and basically as I got rid of the worms, my black circles started disappearing. It is quite a process. I also feel that, one of the mechanisms for the symptoms that the worms cause is basically the body gets quite toxic, literally, because the worms are essentially feeding inside you, but they're also, urinating and defecating, figuratively speaking, into our body. And then, the liver gets overburdened because it has to detoxify not only the toxins that we're producing and putting into our body, but also the toxins that the worms are producing. And if we have been infested for a long time, there could be quite a decent volume of worms in our system. And it's really not pretty. Some of the worms, for example, they leave the bowel and they actually migrate through the body. Some of them migrate back into the throat and then drop back into the throat. And I'm saying this just to give you a little bit of motivation to look into this, because yes, it sounds scary, it sounds revolting, it really does. But this is why I'm bringing this to your attention, so that you can rid yourselves of the worms. You can ask your GP to test for them, because I think we need to raise the awareness, because it's a myth at this point that these sort of large worms are uncommon in the UK. They are pretty common. It's just we're not testing for them. We're hardly ever treating patients for those conditions. So what I have done, I have cut seafood out completely, totally and entirely. If any of you are going to do the same thing, just make sure that you're going to get iodine from somewhere else. So I would suggest having some seaweed on a regular basis. What I do with my seaweed, I pressure cook it for 30 minutes. I think 30 minutes of high temperature, like above 60 Celsius, is enough to kill most parasites. And if you have a pressure cooker, that's added like an insurance that they're going to be killed, because the cooking pressure, I believe, is high in a pressure cooker. And if you're going to have fish, I think you're going to have to change the recipes so that it's cooked for at least half an hour at high temperature. It's going to be different, experience eating that sort of fish when it's been cooked for such a long time, but at least you're not going to have the parasites. So I'm going to link some nice links underneath this video. I might even link some graphic videos just to show you how animals in nature also suffer with worms, because it's a real problem. And I think, you know, the reason for this happening so much now is because of the ecology of the oceans. So when the conditions around the fish, around in those environments are poor, because we have contaminated oceans, the fish are not going to be so healthy. When they're not so healthy, the immune system is not so strong. What happens? Parasites. So it's kind of something that I believe humankind unfortunately has created for itself. Obviously, I'm part of the humankind. We've created this for ourselves, and now we're just reaping the fruits, unfortunately. But I'm here just to make you aware that this problem exists. And if you have some unexplained symptoms, like I was saying, tiredness, aches and pains, depression even, maybe vague abdominal discomfort, bowel is doing something different, you're either constipated or you have diarrhea. Or women, listen, if you have hormonal issues, there also could be a link, because what happens when our liver is struggling to handle the toxins from the worms, it leaves our hormones to be handled later. It never gets to them. That's why we have this hangover of hormones, especially in the second part of the cycle, that doesn't seem to go away as it used to, and you get all these symptoms. So hormonal symptoms are not always hormonal. There could be just too much toxicity in the body and the liver is struggling. But liver is obviously a separate topic. Okay, I hope this was helpful. I send you all a lot of love. Bye for now.